My name is Elowen Park, 29 years old. It was never supposed to stretch into a 3-year sentence. It was supposed to be long enough for Dad's back to stop seizing when he bent to tie his boots, long enough for Mom to pick up a few extra housekeeping shifts, long enough for me to say yes to the offer in Denver, or maybe even move in with Danielle like we joked about, legs tucked under us in the front seat of my car, eating cold Thai noodles out of the carton and letting the sauce stain our knuckles. Just until things settle, I told myself. Weeks slid into months. Months slid into years, and the seasons wore grooves in the window glass of the twin bed I never left. My bed, but not my life. By the second winter, our landlord threatened to shut off the heat if we were late again. I paid the bill with a credit card and slept in 2 pairs of socks anyway, listening to the baseboards tick like a metronome for a song I wasn't allowed to stop playing. I learned how to tiptoe past Kendra's door without reminding her there were bags of groceries to carry up, bills stacked like a leaning city on the entryway table, letters demanding attention stamped in red so loud I could hear them. People said Kendra was focused on her future, as if future were a fragile heirloom only she could cradle. She had potential, everyone agreed. I guess I had durability. That word you use for luggage, not people. The one who could be overpacked and still zip shut. Dependable was my orbit. The one who could pick up Mom's half of the rent when the hotel cut her hours without warning. The one who could drive Dad to physical therapy before dawn and sit in the waiting room pretending to read about plants that wouldn't grow in our north-facing windows. The one who could cancel a job interview because Dad fell again and the pain medication turned him glassy and afraid. I took on a second project at the firm. Just for a month, my manager said, and the month grew claws and refused to let go. I said no to trips, skipped birthdays with the kind of practiced shrug that looks like disinterest, not grief. I stopped saving listings for studios I never called about. I stopped imagining a set of keys that lived in my pocket and not on a hook labeled family. There's a kind of silence that isn't peace. It gathers in the corners like dust, too soft to notice until it coats your lungs. Our house learned that silence. Not angry. Anger is hot. It moves, but a cool acceptance that I was the scaffolding and everyone else would climb. Sometimes Mom would rest her hand on my shoulder after her shift, palm smelling faintly of lemon and bleach, and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you." It sounded like love and tasted like a trap. Dad would raise his eyes, tired, apologetic, and squeeze my wrist. Kendra, if she was home, would skate past the kitchen with a wave, a sunshine girl in borrowed light. "Can't stay," she'd say, zipping a jacket that wasn't warm enough. "Big week coming up." Her future had a permanent exclamation point. I kept a list in the back of my planner, a private tally of things I'd told myself I could live without. The Italian boots I'd almost bought. The concert I'd returned tickets for. The Denver job's start date, scratched out like a word I'd mispronounced. The little ceramic lamp with a linen shade I'd found at the thrift store and put back because the electricity bill was due. Each line looked small alone. Together they were a calendar of quiet disappearances. When the landlord announced he was selling, he didn't look at me. He picked his words carefully with Mom, explaining how these things happen, how the market is the market, how we'd have notice. We'd be fine. Dad sat on the edge of the couch like a kid in a principal's office. Kendra swore under her breath and began scrolling apartments on her phone, the kind with exposed brick and light you can pretend is sunlight. I stood at the sink with a dripping plate, watching a sliver of cloudy sky in the window, and felt something settle in me with a soft, heavy thud. Not panic, not yet. More like a chair pushed back at the end of a long meal. I have a theory about courage. It rarely arrives blazing. It comes in on the same feet that take out the trash, that refill prescriptions, that put gas in the car at 11 p.m., so your parents don't have to do it in the morning. Courage, in my experience, looks like a sentence you didn't plan to say out loud. "Maybe it's time we bought something," I said. They blinked in unison, like a flock startled by a single noise. "Bought?" Mom echoed, the word traveling from confusion to hope in one breath. "A house," I heard myself add, as if naming it could conjure it. "I can figure it out." Kendra's head popped up, phone lowering, eyes bright. "You mean, for us?" The way she said it put me in a place I didn't know I'd been standing, at the head of a table I'd been setting for years. Dad exhaled, a sound that felt like February giving up its ice. Ellie, he said. No one but family calls me that. Are you sure? Sure is a funny word. It suggests math, clean lines. All I had was a ledger of late nights and a spine that had learned to carry more than it should. But the idea had slid into the room and sat down beside me like it belonged. I didn't look directly at it, afraid it would vanish. It's time, I said, and the sentence was a door that opened when I pushed. Mom clapped. The quick, flustered kind of clap she does when something good happens and she wants to believe it's going to keep happening. She moved toward me, fingers fluttering at the base of her throat as if a necklace could materialize there. Oh, Elowen, you. Kendra crossed the room and hugged me, arms around my shoulders, hair that smelled like coconut and hairspray brushing my cheek. You're the best, she said, buoyant, the way she'd always been when somebody else caught her before she fell. I hugged her back, but I kept my hands open, not gripping. Dad's eyes shone, and for a second he looked like the man in the wedding photos, the one with a tie too bright, standing next to the woman who laughed, without looking over her shoulder. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a calculator, the cheap kind that clacks. The window turned black, a mirror instead of a view. I wrote numbers until they blurred. I Googled mortgage terms and scratched down phrases like fixed rate and escrow that made me sound like I knew what I was doing. The refrigerator hummed. The upstairs neighbor's laughter filtered down through the ceiling like footsteps in snow. Every so often, a doubt would slip across the surface of my mind, thin, silver, fish fast, and I'd catch it by the tail. What if you can't? What if it's too much? What if they all expect, and you give again until there's nothing left? From the hallway, I could see the closed door to Kendra's room, a little chipped at the bottom where the vacuum had bitten it, a sliver of light under the door, the flicker of her screen, the soft upspeak of someone telling a story about themselves loudly. For a ridiculous moment, I imagined futures like rooms in a house, doors you choose, doors chosen for you. The image lingered, stubborn as a stain. You okay? Mom's voice, soft at my shoulder. I hadn't heard her pad in. She wore her old robe, the one with a hole in the sleeve, and looked smaller in the dim. You don't have to do this, you know, she said in the tone that means, I'd love it if you did. I know, I said, and we both understood everything in those 2 words. She touched my hair, a feathering gesture that had soothed me as a child, and then retreated, the robe's belt trailing like a question mark. On my way to bed, I passed Kendra's door again. The light under it brightened, then went dark, as if she'd sensed me there and turned off the lamp to avoid the shape of me. It occurred to me, not a thought, more a pulse, that every house holds more than furniture. It holds arrangements, agreements no one writes down. Someone gets the morning sun, and someone gets the basement. Someone smells the bread first when it's warm. Someone learns to swallow. I lay on my twin bed, the same one I'd had since high school, and watched the shadow of the curtain breathe. In my mind, a porch swing moved lazily in air that didn't yet exist for me, a railing under a hand that could finally rest. I tried to picture myself turning a key and the lock answering. For the first time in a long time, the picture didn't fight me. But there was a seam in the image, a thin line I couldn't name. Maybe it was the way Kendra had said for us, with that quick, easy claim. Maybe it was the way Mom's relief sounded like a debt I'd agreed to pay without reading the fine print. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was the house itself from the future trying to warn me where the floorboards were soft. Morning came with its usual impatience, and so did life. Emails, voicemail, the bus that always pulled away, just as I reached the corner. I moved through it buoyed by the strange lightness of having said a thing and meaning it. In my head, I began sorting rooms I hadn't seen yet. One for Mom's plants, a corner for Dad's old records, a space for Kendra's. What? Her future. I laughed at myself and shook it away. A house's walls and a roof and a signature, not a prophecy. That evening, our landlord stopped by with a tentative smile and a stack of printed listings for comparable places, as if handing us papers could soften an exit. You folks will land on your feet, he said. I almost smiled. People had been telling me that my whole life. After he left, I cleaned the kitchen like I was prepping a stage. Bleach, hot water, folded towels. I wiped the counter until my reflection came back to me in streaks. My face looked the same, My hands did not. They looked older, a little, or maybe just more certain. "Let's do it," I told my reflection, and for once it answered. The listing appeared like an answered dare. 3 bedrooms, a deep porch with a swing that looked like it could hold the weight of every tired evening I'd ever had, a backyard with grass that didn't apologize for being patchy. The photos showed morning light spilling across a small kitchen table, the kind of light that makes even instant coffee feel important. It was in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where the sidewalks didn't buckle from neglect, and the street trees looked like they'd been there longer than the houses. I printed the listing and pinned it to the fridge, not for anyone else to see, but so I'd have to pass it every time I got the milk. "You're serious about this?" Dad asked one morning, mug in hand, studying the paper. His voice had that mix of hope and suspicion, like someone offering you a fishing rod without quite believing you'll catch anything. "Serious," I said. The process was like learning a foreign language under threat. Fixed rates, escrow, inspection contingencies. I became fluent in the difference between pending and under contract. Learned how to read the fine print until the words stopped being words and turned into terms I could measure my future against. Every lunch break was a call. Lender, realtor, inspector, title office. Every evening was paperwork that multiplied like weeds, each page demanding my name in ink. I signed until my signature lost its curves, until it looked like something stamped on the bottom of a cardboard box. The down payment was a punch I saw coming, but couldn't dodge. $10,000 wired away in a sterile bank office, the teller smiling like I'd just done something noble. I walked out lighter, not in the way people mean when they say free, but lighter, like you've set down something you might still need. The day the realtor handed me the keys, she said, "Congratulations, it's yours." And for a moment I believed her. I stood in the empty living room, floorboards sighing under my shoes, and felt a quiet pride bloom in my chest. Not the loud kind, the Facebook kind, but the kind that sits in your lungs and makes you breathe deeper. Moving day was its own kind of storm. Dad borrowed a friend's dented pickup that rattled when you shifted into third. Mom carried boxes of kitchenware like she was 20 years younger, barking orders about where the mixing bowls should go. Even Kendra chipped in, swanning through with her curling iron tucked under one arm, a box of posters under the other. She dropped them in the largest bedroom and grinned. "Guess this is mine," she said, half joking, but her hand lingered on the doorframe like she was claiming territory. I didn't bite. I just carried another box into the smallest bedroom, the one with barely enough space for a full bed and no closet, but it overlooked the backyard. I stood at the window, watching Mom set a ceramic planter on the porch and Dad fiddle with the swing chain. Light poured through the glass, warm on my cheek. I thought, this is enough. That evening, when most of the boxes were unpacked and the air smelled of cardboard and dust, we sat cross-legged on the floor eating pizza straight from the box. The conversation rolled between us, easy. Kendra scrolled on her phone, snapping photos of the house from every angle. At one point, she laughed at something she'd typed, and I caught the flicker of her reflection in the window, smiling like someone who had just stepped into a future she didn't build. Later in the kitchen, Mom touched my arm. "You've done something big here, Elle," she said, her voice warm, but edged with that motherly weight that always carries more meaning than it admits. "We're so lucky." Lucky. I held that word in my mouth like hard candy, sweet, but impossible to bite into. As I lay in my new, too-small room that night, the sounds of the house adjusting around me, I tried to let the day settle as a win. A good thing, mine. But somewhere under the floorboards of my mind, something shifted. A faint creak, a warning I didn't yet have the shape of. I didn't wait for the weekend. That night, I walked straight through the front door, still in my work clothes, and didn't bother setting down my bag. Dad was sunk into the couch watching the evening news, the blue glow painting the lines in his face. Mom sat at the dining table, folding laundry into neat stacks like she was restoring order to the universe. Kendra's door was closed. No surprise there. "We need to talk," I said. Both of them looked up, startled but not alarmed, like I'd interrupted a commercial break. I held out my phone, the Facebook post still open. Kendra's grin glared back at us from the porch. "Why is the house in Kendra's name?" Mom blinked, once, twice, as if she'd misheard me. Dad's hand went to his forehead, rubbing slow circles. Neither rushed to answer. It's not what you think, Mom said finally, her voice careful, smoothing invisible wrinkles. Then explain it. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. She's younger. It's about security, her future. You're already on your feet. A sharp laugh escaped before I could stop it. My feet? I've been paying your rent for 3 years, covering bills when shifts got cut, canceling interviews to stay home with Dad. That's what you call being on my feet? That's why, Mom said softly, as if I'd just confirmed her point. You've always stepped up. You're stable. Kendra, she needs help. She's still finding her way. And I'm what? I asked. The scaffolding? Elowen, Dad warned, his voice low, the way you talk to someone holding a match near dry leaves. Don't make this a fight. You bought this house for the family. No, my voice didn't shake. I bought it. I signed. I paid. And you handed it to her. They didn't deny it, not even a flinch. That landed harder than anything they could have said. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that burns steady, controlled. You knew, and you didn't tell me. Mom opened her mouth, but I was already moving, out of the living room, down the hall, to the filing cabinet in the corner of my too small bedroom. If they wouldn't give me answers, maybe the papers would. It happened on a Tuesday, during a lull at work when my brain was too tired to solve anything real. I opened Facebook, half to kill time, half to see if the world outside my office had changed without me. There it was, Kendra, framed in front of the porch, her hand wrapped casually around the railing. I'd scrubbed clean myself just days before. She wore that bright, easy grin people mistake for charm. The caption read, "Thank you, Mom and Dad, for giving me my first house." The words arranged themselves in my mind like an optical illusion, something that couldn't possibly be what it looked like, and yet there it was, in a font I recognized as her favorite. I stared at the screen so long my coffee went cold. Read it again, and again. My name wasn't there. My effort wasn't there. It was as if the mortgage payments in my name, the down payment pulled from my account, the ink on the documents in my hand had all been invisible. I called her. The phone rang twice, 3 times, and for a second I thought she might not answer. Then her voice, bright, unbothered. "Hey, what's up?" "What's up is that post," I said, and it came out sharper than I'd intended. I cleared my throat. "The house?" "Oh yeah," she laughed, airy as a paper bag. "Cute, right?" "Kendra, what do you mean your first house?" Silence. A small, deliberate silence. "Well, Mom and Dad put the deed in my name. It just made more sense legally." My fingers tightened on the phone until I could hear the plastic groan. "Why?" "I don't know, taxes or something. They said it was better this way. Don't be weird about it." She said it like we were discussing the arrangement of throw pillows, like the very foundation of my adult life hadn't just shifted under my feet. I thought about the hours I'd spent at the bank, the steady thump of my heartbeat as I signed my name to papers I believed meant mine. And now, in a single casual sentence, it was hers. "I'm not being weird," I said, though my voice had gone low, tight. "Good," she replied, the smile in her voice as clear as glass, "because it's for all of us anyway." When the call ended, I sat with the phone in my lap and stared at the photo again, her hand on the railing, her smile too wide, and the caption, thanking the wrong people entirely. It was like watching someone frame your reflection and sell it as their self-portrait. That night, I didn't tell myself you'll sort it out tomorrow. I told myself the truth. This is not a misunderstanding. This is something else. The cabinet drawer stuck like it always did, catching on a splinter in the frame. I yanked harder until it gave with a sharp groan, the sound like something old protesting. My fingers sifted through folders, insurance, utilities, bank statements, until I found the one labeled, in my handwriting, legal deed. I expected to see the copies I'd kept from closing, the ones with my name neat and centered in black ink. Instead, the first page was a notarized form dated 3 weeks before we closed, transferring future ownership to Kendra. A neat legal phrase in bold. Family gift. I stared at it until the words blurred. There was Mom's signature, Dad's, Kendra's, and there at the bottom, my own lawyer's initials, the lawyer I'd trusted to protect me, letters I'd paid for. The air in the room shifted. It felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in to watch. My pulse thudded in my throat, and I pressed the papers flat against my knees, rereading the date as if I'd somehow gotten it wrong. 3 weeks before we moved in. That meant every dinner where they'd laughed about paint colors, every moment Mom had thanked me for doing this for us, every box Kendra had unpacked with a smile. All of it had been after they'd already decided I wouldn't own the thing I'd bled myself dry to buy. A part of me wanted to march back down the hall and slam the papers onto the table, demand they admit they'd planned it. But another part, the one that had learned to keep her voice steady while the ground shifted, knew they'd only repeat the same lines. It made sense. You're stable. She needs it more. So instead, I sat there with the documents in my lap and thought, they didn't just erase me, they rehearsed it. By morning, I had the documents in a manila folder, edges already soft from how many times I'd picked it up overnight. Sleep had been impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the date on that deed in sharp black ink, the pen strokes like scars. I called a different attorney, one whose office was 3 blocks from my work and had good reviews for complicated family matters. They gave me an appointment for noon. The waiting room was warm, almost too warm, with magazines that still had subscription cards tucked between their pages. A plant in the corner looked overwatered, its leaves sagging under their own weight. Elise, the attorney, appeared exactly on time. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, a handshake that didn't linger. She spread the documents out between us, flipping each page slowly, methodically, her gaze moving like a scanner. I sat with my hands clasped tight in my lap, trying to read her face the way she was reading my future. Finally, she looked up. You signed the mortgage, she said evenly. That makes you financially responsible. But the deed, that's in your sister's name. I nodded once. My throat felt dry. Unless you can prove fraud or coercion, there's very little legal ground to reclaim the property. Even if you paid for everything, she can argue it was a gift. The word gift made my stomach twist. And if my parents were the ones who arranged it? Her gaze softened, but only slightly. If they're not contesting the title transfer, it reinforces the idea of intent. It will be hard to challenge without their support. I stared at the neat stack of papers between us, all the pages I'd signed, believing they meant security, permanence. They'd been building a loophole under my feet the whole time. Elise leaned back in her chair, considering. If it was a gift, there's something else to keep in mind. Your sister could have a tax obligation. A property valued over certain federal thresholds requires the recipient to file a gift tax return within the year. If she doesn't, there can be penalties. And if she's received other financial benefits, student loan deferments, government aid, that ownership might change her eligibility. For the first time since walking in, I felt something flicker that wasn't despair. Not hope. Hope felt too clean, but focus. How would I check? I asked. She gave me a small, knowing smile. Public records, loan documents, employment history, and sometimes people leave the door open without realizing it. I left her office with the folder under my arm, my stomach knotted tight, and the beginnings of a plan tapping at the back of my mind. That night, I cleared a space on my kitchen table, pushed aside the unopened mail, and opened my laptop. The glow from the screen washed the room in cold light, making the corners seem farther away. I started with what I already knew, Kendra's student loans. Mom had once handed me the FAFSA forms when Kendra was applying for aid, saying, "You're better with this stuff." I remembered the lines where our parents' names went in as co-signers. A quick search through the federal loan portal confirmed it. Over $20,000 in loans, currently in deferment for economic hardship. I took a screenshot. Next, her work. I remembered a glossy resume on the family computer claiming she was part-time staff at a design agency. The agency's website didn't list her anywhere. No LinkedIn post, no profile, no staff bio. I called a contact I knew who worked in the same building. "She's freelance," he said without hesitation. "Off the books. The company likes to avoid payroll taxes." I took notes, the pen moving almost too fast. Then the county property tax database. I searched her name. Nothing. No filings for the current year. No gift declaration. The house existed in records as hers, but she hadn't followed the rules that ownership demands. It was like they'd been so busy twisting the system to take the house from me, they'd forgotten the system could twist back. I started a list. IRS tip line. Department of Education Fraud Division. State Tax Board. An anonymous submission portal for underreported income. The apartment was silent except for the clack of my keyboard. I wasn't torching their lives. I was opening the door they'd left unlocked and letting the wind in. By the time I shut my laptop, the plan was clear, sharp-edged. I slid my list under the manila folder, the two together like a loaded slingshot waiting in the dark. The first sign it was working came 3 weeks later. I was making tea before work when my phone lit up with Kendra's name. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear her voice. "Hey," she said, breathless, like she'd been running. I got something from the IRS. I don't understand it. Something about a gift tax? Can you call me back?" Her words tripped over each other, the pitch creeping higher with each syllable. "Just please call me." I didn't. 2 days later, Mom called. Then Dad. Then both together, their voices layered in that tag team way they used when they wanted something big. "Be the bigger person," Mom said on one message. "She's your sister. She didn't mean for it to get this far." "This wasn't supposed to happen," Dad added in another. "It's gotten out of hand." None of them said we're sorry. None of them said we were wrong. I sat at my kitchen table, letting each call roll to voicemail. The tea cooled in my cup as sunlight slid across the wall, turning gold, then fading. My phone buzzed again and again, the sound almost rhythmic. I muted it. It was strange, how quiet triumph could feel. Not fireworks, not a drumbeat, just the calm of holding your ground while the tide comes in and realizing you're not moving. I didn't owe them answers. Not anymore. The knock came on a Thursday evening, sharp and urgent, the kind that makes you pause mid-step. I checked the peephole. Kendra. Her mascara was smudged into faint shadows beneath her eyes, and her hair was scraped into a bun so tight it made her look younger, almost like the teenager who used to ask me to drive her to parties. She clutched a manila envelope against her chest as if it might keep her upright. I opened the door halfway. "I didn't know," she blurted before I could speak. Her voice wavered, like she was reciting a speech she hadn't practiced enough. "About the taxes. They say I owe over $8,000. I don't have it." I stayed silent. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, glancing at the floor. "And the loans. They pulled my deferment. Said I'm not eligible anymore. Then the agency let me go. They're being audited." She laughed once, short and humorless. "I don't even know how they found all that out so fast." Still, I didn't speak. Her eyes flicked up to mine. "Please, I know you're mad, but I didn't mean for this. I thought the house was for all of us. Mom and Dad said it made sense this way. I didn't think—" "That's the problem," I said. She swallowed, lips pressing together like she wanted to argue, but knew she shouldn't. I need help." I met her gaze. "You posted it. You claimed it. You made it yours in front of everyone." Her mouth opened, then closed. I stepped back, my hand on the door. "Not this time." And I shut it. I stood there for a moment, palm flat against the wood, listening to the faint sound of her footsteps retreating down the hall. The quiet that followed didn't feel like victory. It felt like the air after a storm, still heavy, but clearer. 3 days passed before the phone rang again. Mom's number this time. I let it go to voicemail, then sat on the couch and listened. "She's your sister," Mom said, her voice threaded with exhaustion. "She's in over her head." I hit replay. "She always is," I murmured to the empty room. The message went on. "She's young, she's made mistakes, but family helps family. You've always been the one to pull her out." I stopped the playback and set the phone on the coffee table. For years, that line, "You've always been the one," had been a point of pride, proof that I was dependable. Now it just sounded like a life sentence I'd been serving without parole. I sat there, staring at the folder of documents on the table. Then I opened my desk drawer, pulled out the most recent letter from an agency, this one addressed to Kendra, though it had arrived in my mailbox by mistake. Another fine, another unpaid notice. I slid it into a manila envelope, sealed it, and wrote her name across the front in block letters. That evening, I placed it on my front porch under the dim glow of the motion light. No note, no explanation. When I shut the door, the lock clicked into place with a finality that felt almost ceremonial. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without clenching my jaw. By early spring, the house was gone. The notice came first, a crisp white sheet taped to the front door in bold black letters. Bank repossession, unpaid taxes, loan defaults. The bureaucratic summary of a collapse. I didn't drive by. I didn't need to. In my head, I could already see it. The porch swing swaying idly in the wind. The yard littered with a few stray leaves that no one had bothered to rake. The blinds drawn tight. The image carried no sting, only distance. I'd stopped seeing it as mine long before the bank made it official. Kendra moved into a cramped apartment near the city, sharing a one-bedroom with two other people. A mattress on the floor, a chipped mug she'd once borrowed from Mom. She picked up a part-time retail job she didn't talk about. I knew because she didn't post about it. Kendra only shared the parts of her life that glittered. My parents went back to renting. This time, a small duplex far from the center of town, the kind with yellowed blinds that don't open all the way, and baseboard heaters that click and hum like they're debating whether to work. They didn't tell me they'd moved. I found out through a forwarded change of address notice from the bank. None of it surprised me. If anything, the silence between us felt like the most honest thing we'd shared in years. By May, I'd put in an offer on a one-bedroom condo. No porch swing, no sprawling yard. Just a second-floor unit with a creaky balcony and kitchen tiles that looked like they belonged in the 1980s. But when I stood in the living room during the showing, sunlight poured through the windows in a way that made everything else irrelevant. Morning light, warm and steady, the kind that felt like it could anchor you. The offer was accepted within a week. I signed every document myself, my name the only one on the line. No family to witness the moment. No photos on the porch for Facebook. Just me, the agent, and the notary, passing papers back and forth at a chipped conference table. When the last signature was done, I set the pen down and felt, not joy exactly, but relief, like finally loosening a knot you'd been carrying in your chest. Moving in was quiet. I carried boxes up the narrow stairs alone, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the hallway. The place smelled faintly of cedar from the shelf I'd stained years ago and brought with me, and of fresh paint I'd rolled onto the walls over 2 long nights. No one commented on the size of the bedroom. No one suggested where their things might go. Every corner belonged to me. On the first night, I stood by the balcony door, looking out over the street, and realized I didn't have to share the view with anyone. The air felt clean. The silence was my own. A week after I moved in, the letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting on the envelope was familiar. Rounded, a little uneven, like someone who wrote fast and hoped no one noticed the mistakes. I set it on the counter and stared at it for a while, the way you'd look at a gift you weren't sure was meant for you. Eventually, I opened it. 5 pages. Kendra's words sprawled across the paper in black ink. Apologies, explanations, maybe regrets. It was hard to tell where one ended and the next began. She said she hadn't understood what the house meant to me, that she'd never meant to take anything away, that Mom and Dad had told her the arrangement was temporary, a smart move for the family. She admitted she should have asked more questions, posted less, listened harder. There were moments that almost sounded sincere, others that felt like rehearsed lines borrowed from someone else's idea of contrition. I read it once, my eyes moving steadily from start to finish without lingering. When I was done, I folded the pages neatly and slid them into the back of a drawer I rarely opened. Not out of spite. If I'd wanted to punish her, I would have thrown it away, but because I didn't need to reread it. I didn't need her to see me clearly anymore. I met Mateo that fall at a friend's small dinner party. He wasn't loud, didn't dominate the conversation. Instead, he asked questions and actually waited for the answers. When I mentioned I'd just moved into my own place, he smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that seems to settle into his eyes, and said, "That must feel good." It took weeks before I told him about the house, about Kendra, about the way my parents had justified it as if they were explaining the weather. I expected advice, or maybe a story of his own family drama. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, then said, "That must have hurt." No one had ever said it like that before, not as an accusation, not as a challenge, just naming it for what it was. We started spending weekends together. Sometimes he'd bring over coffee and we'd sit on my creaky balcony, not talking much, just letting the radio hum in the background. Other times we cooked in my too small kitchen, moving around each other like we'd been doing it for years. Mateo never assumed. He never decided for me what I should feel or do. When I hesitated, he asked. When I needed quiet, he let it be quiet. It was strange, learning a new rhythm, one where I didn't have to anticipate someone else's needs before they spoke, where my role wasn't predetermined. And slowly, without me noticing, the space in my life that had once been filled with constant obligation started filling with something else, something lighter. By winter, my life had shape again, one I'd drawn myself. Tuesdays became dinner nights with coworkers, the kind of evenings where conversation meandered from bad TV to office gossip without anyone asking for a favor at the end. Saturdays were for the hiking group I'd joined, where no one knew my last name, let alone my family history. Sundays I let myself sleep in, sunlight slipping across my pillow without guilt tagging along. Work changed too. My manager called me into her office one Friday and said I was being promoted. "It's not just your designs," she said. "It's the way you handle pressure, the steadiness you bring." I smiled and thanked her, but inside I thought about how long it had taken me to understand the difference between quiet strength and being everyone's anchor. One was a skill, the other was a slow erasure. Matteo fit into this new rhythm easily. Some nights we talked for hours over pasta and wine. Other nights we barely spoke, content to just exist in the same space. He never made me feel like silence needed to be filled. The phone rang less now. Mom called every few weeks, her messages careful, almost tentative. She didn't ask for anything anymore, but she didn't apologize either. I didn't expect her to. It wasn't that I'd stopped caring. It was that I'd finally stopped playing a role that left nothing for me. One night, Matteo and I were sitting on the balcony, the air cool enough to make us keep our mugs close. He asked gently, "Do you ever miss them?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about holidays crowded into that old duplex, about Kendra sprawled across the couch while I cleared the dishes, about Mom's hands smelling faintly of lemon cleaner. I thought about the version of them I'd always hoped might show up one day, the one where love didn't come with an invoice. "Sometimes," I said finally, "but not the version I had. I miss the version I hoped they'd be." He didn't press. He just nodded, like that answer was enough, and reached for my hand. His thumb traced slow circles against my skin, and for once I let someone comfort me without feeling the need to earn it. The city was quiet in the way it only gets on weeknights. A few cars passed in the distance, their headlights flashing across the balcony railing. Somewhere, a neighbor laughed. For the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't feel the pull of someone else's crisis. No one was expecting me to fix anything. I wasn't waiting for a call that would rearrange my life. I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet wrap around me, not as a burden, but as a home. Tonight, while sorting through a box of old papers, I found it. A photo of the first house, the one I bought, the one they gave away. Kendra stood in the doorway, smiling too wide, her hand resting on the frame like she'd grown there. Behind her, the porch swing hung still, the railing freshly painted from the week I'd spent crouched in the sun, brush in hand. I flipped the photo over and, in the corner, wrote 2 words, "Not mine." Then I slid it into a box labeled, "No longer needed." It felt lighter than I expected, not like I'd erased something, but like I'd filed it in the right place at last. I turned off the lights and stood at my window, the city spread quiet beneath me. Somewhere below, life was still rushing for other people, late buses, grocery bags cutting into palms, phones ringing with news they didn't ask for. I watched it all without feeling pulled under. "They were never my home," I whispered, the words more truth than bitterness. I was building someone else's shelter with my hands, and now, finally, I live inside walls that don't ask me to disappear. Behind me, the condo was still. My walls, my air, my space. The cedar shelf in the corner still carried the faint scent I'd given it. The fresh flowers on the table leaned toward the window, and tomorrow's sunlight was already waiting to find me here.